I know what he got away with and wish I'd done more part one. I grew up gay in a small town with very few prospects for dating. When I was 19, I met a man. He was 36, I believe. One night he came into my job and we started talking while I rang him up. We hit it off immediately. After about a month of talking, I ended up moving in with him. For 7 months we lived as a couple without ever crossing the line into having sex. Young and naive, I believed he was simply taking time to get to know me and treating the pursuit of a serious relationship with respect. I was wrong. His name is Delta Breland Thompson. Before the 2008 housing crisis, he had been a high-level, white-collar mortgage underwriter for Countrywide in Dallas. Funny enough, I've since seen his office mentioned in documentaries about the collapse of the housing market. After everything fell apart, he was forced to return home to the backwoods of North Louisiana. He lived at 8 and 28 Point Pleasant Road, a rundown property that honestly should have been condemned. There were 2 houses on the land, his and his grandmother's. Living with his grandmother were Delta's mother, Faye, and his adopted son, Stefan Jackson. The nights of clubbing, easy sex, and wild living were over for him. His life was different now. His options were as limited as mine. He once mentioned that he had slept with a guy from down the street before we met. I was curious, but not bothered. I was 19, fit, and good-looking. I didn't see it as a threat. His son had a couple of friends he hung out with regularly, one a cousin, and the other a kid from down the street named Meikle Merritt. A few months after we began living together, Delta informed me that Meikle was the guy he had been sleeping with before we met. I was surprised, but not overly concerned. Still, I asked questions about Meikle's age and how their relationship had started. Delta told me that Meikle had discovered he was gay and pursued him. According to Delta, he initially resisted and told Meikle that if he waited until he turned 18, then they could cross that line. Meikle bided his time and, on his 16th birthday, told Delta that he was actually 18. Believing him, Delta crossed that line. Delta was 36, and Meikle was supposedly 18. They slept together for months. One day they were talking about Meikle's mother's mid-1960s Mustang. Meikle mentioned that she planned to give it to him on his 18th birthday. Delta corrected him, saying, "But you're already 18. That's when Meikle came clean. Delta realized what had actually happened. Instead of immediately cutting things off, though, he continued the relationship until I entered the picture. That was the story I was given. Our relationship was always rocky, especially with the lack of sex. Over the 3 years we were together, we only had sex 5 times. Eventually, I caught on that Delta and Meikle were still involved. After a lot of drama, denials, and gaslighting that made me question my sanity, Delta asked me to move out. Believing I was the problem, I did. I got my own place. Soon after, Delta failed his big LPN nursing exam, spiraled into a depression, and moved in with me. There I was, 20 years old, taking care of a man who was now 36 or 37 and still refused to fully commit to me. One day I came home and found Meikle in my house. I made them both leave. Later, Delta decided that I needed to move on emotionally. He helped me set up my first gay hookup profile on A4A. He even helped me pick out a guy to meet. I went and spent a weekend with him. I left my phone in my car the entire time. It was a wonderful weekend. When I went to leave, I found hundreds of missed calls and texts from Delta. He said that during that time, he had finally understood my point of view. He said he now believed that I loved him and that I wasn't crazy. Hearing that validation from him felt like an enormous weight lifting off my shoulders. That same night, we decided to get married. He promised to leave Meikle alone forever. By then, Meikle was either approaching or had just turned 18. We started making wedding plans, and I was incredibly happy to finally feel like we were on the same page. I am unsure if the following is true, but it is what Delta told me happened, and it affected the rest of my interactions with both Delta and Meikle. We moved back into Delta's place for a few months. One night while I was at work, he called me screaming into the phone. He had gone to his grandmother's house to get his son and walked in on the now 18-year-old Meikle having sex with Delta's 13 or 14-year-old son. He was furious. He banned Meikle from the property and made sure everyone knew he was not allowed back. I wanted to hurt Meikle badly, maybe worse. Delta told me not to escalate things, saying he had already handled it, so I didn't. A few months later, Delta came home from work and told me I should go stay with my dad for a while because he needed space. I agreed without question. I didn't sleep for the next 2 days. My suspicions were through the roof. On the third night, around 9 p.m., I drove to his house. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Delta and Mikkel sitting on the back porch smoking cigarettes and talking like nothing had happened. I jumped out of my car and stormed up to the porch, calling them every sick name I could think of and telling them exactly how low I thought they were. Delta called me crazy and dramatic. I called him a sick perv and kicked leaves toward him from the ground. He jumped off the porch and shoved me onto my back. His fist was pulled back and clenched. He didn't hit me, though. Instead, he got up and walked back toward the porch. Sometimes it's hard to ignore the feeling that God exists. Because when he stood up and walked away, both of them looked away from me. As I glanced down, I noticed that Delta's phone had fallen out of his pocket onto the ground. I picked it up as I stood, apologized for being dramatic, blamed it on lack of sleep, and left. I drove to the end of the street and opened the phone. It was a prepaid blue flip phone. Reading through the texts, I realized that not only were they sleeping together again, but they were actually going out on dates together. He was sleeping and dating the man who had sexually abused his child. I was probably doing 30 mph when I whipped back into his driveway, sliding a bit through the front yard. I got out, walked up, and started yelling again about how sick they both were. Delta looked at me and said I needed help. I held up his phone. His face turned to pure confusion. Then Mikkel snapped, "It's none of your business what we do." That was enough to light the fuse. I charged onto the porch. Mikkel grabbed a metal folding chair and held it between us. I grabbed his shirt and had him. I actually had him. Then it hit me. I had never been in a fight before, and suddenly I didn't know what to do. Delta, who had been military police in the Air Force, came up behind me, yanked me to the porch floor, and the two of them started kicking me. The next thing I remember, I woke up on the ground next to my car. I don't know how long I was out, but it was long enough for Delta's mother and son to walk down the hill from the other house. Delta was back on the porch smoking and looking away. Mikkel was gone. I stood up, choking on blood from my broken nose, and loudly told his mother and son what I knew had been going on. They didn't say a word. I got in my car and left. A few days later, I went to the local police department to make a report about what had happened. They wouldn't take it. I tried to press charges over the broken nose, but they never even took out a pen. His family had influence in the town. They had been major local black business owners in the 1970s and 80s. His grandmother was in local parades celebrating her success. My guess is that this is why they simply listened to my story and dismissed me. Hell, I even heard that the mother Faye had been involved in a police shootout and it was swept under the rug, no jail time. Days passed. Then one day an officer showed up at my house with a restraining order and a court date. I showed up in court, but Delta didn't. I think he knew that if he appeared, I would have had to defend myself and the entire story would come out. The case was dismissed without me saying a word. Unfortunately, people like that have been a recurring pattern in my life since then, but I am proud to say that because of what I went through with him, I never let another one get away with it. In 2019, I helped capture and put away Adrian Lamb of Houston, Texas, a man who had been sexually abusing his 4-year-old daughter. Later, I helped with the case of Dustin Sabatini, also in Houston, who was wanted for failing to register as a sex offender. Therapists have called me a hero, and the investigator I worked with, Detective Wyatt, personally updated and thanked me during the Adrian Lamb case. She said the information I provided was so thorough that he will likely remain in prison for a very long time, which is rare for crimes like that. So far, though, Delta has gotten away with it. And now, nearly 20 years later, I still wish I could close that chapter of my life by seeing him held accountable for what he did. I wish I had done more back then. Maybe I still can. If this ever gets back to him, I'm sure he'll know exactly who wrote it. He'll know it's the truth, and I wonder what his defense will be.